Welcome to A Date with Darkness podcast, where I will be discussing the impact of hurtful and abusive relationships and how to overcome them so that you can move through your pain and get to the kind of healthy relationships you want, need, and deserve. I'm Dr. Natalie Jones. I'm a licensed psychotherapist based in California. While I hope that you find this podcast educational and informational, please note it should not be substituted for treatment with a licensed mental health professional. Also, due to the nature of the podcast, some of the information presented on the show can be sensitive to some of my listeners, so please note that listener discretion is advised. Hello and welcome back. I'm so excited to put on a new show for you today. We're well into winter here, and this podcast was recorded a little bit early. But this month, the month of March, I am dedicating I'm creating a special series for you guys. It's all about money. It's all about narcissism and money. So every episode for the month of March will definitely be dedicated to money and narcissists and how that shows up in relationships, and how people without boundaries or folks that feel entitled interact with money. So I hope that you enjoy this series. And of course, want to get the administrative stuff out of the way. If you're looking for support from members who have experienced being in a relationship with a narcissist and are looking for support, and as well to offer you support, please note my Facebook group, A Date with Darkness Facebook group. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns for me, or you want to get in contact with me, adatewithdarkness@gmail.com. Also, if you are looking to, maybe get on my free newsletter, weekly newsletter, which I send out every week, typically on Fridays, drnataliejones.com. Make sure you hit the subscribe button for emails and get the freebie that's uploaded onto the website. And as always, of course, you know about the individual and membership coaching that has opened up. So make sure if you want to get on that list or enroll in that, click the link in the show notes below. So, okay, thank you so much for joining in on today's episode. I have a very special guest here to discuss money and how that shows up. Specifically today, we will be discussing fraud that people commit around fraudulent acts that people commit around money. So without further ado, here we go. Hello and welcome to the show, Bernadette.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. And I'm so happy that you could join us on the podcast today. For the listeners that need to get acquainted with you, can you please introduce yourself? Tell us who you are and what you do and the passion behind your work.
Okay. So I'm Bernadette Harris. I am a forensic accountant with By the Book Accounting. My firm has been in business for 20 years. And we're based in Atlanta, but most of our clients are in Georgia, but we do have clients in other states and abroad. Most people ask, what is a forensic accountant and what do forensic accountants do? I have gotten some very interesting questions from that. I've had kids ask me, are you dealing with blood? So when they think of forensic, so just think of forensic accountants are the people who put the numbers together and tell the story that they tell. So kind of like CSI, but with numbers. So forensic accountants, we can take a look at the numbers and we can tell a story based on the things that we see in financial documents and things like that. So that's the very high level version of what it is that I do.
Okay. What got you into that?
Well, I've been an accountant. It's very funny because I went to college and I thought I was going to be a math teacher. Always loved numbers, always loved math. And I'm a first generation college student. So being a teacher seemed like something that I could do. And I went to college to be a math teacher. My first semester in college, I took an education course and I thought, oh, I don't know if I really want to go down this road. And I had a conversation with my college algebra professor, and she said, well, you're really good with numbers. You should look into accounting. And again, I didn't come from a family of professionals, so they were just happy that I was going to college. So I did. I took my next semester, I took an accounting course and I loved it. I fell in love with accounting. And here I am, 30 plus years ago. That's pretty hard for me to say right now. It's been almost 30 years. But yeah, so that's kind of how I got started in accounting, or on that road of accounting. I started my own firm 20 years ago because a couple of reasons. I wanted to have a little more control over my life. I had a young daughter at the time. She was 6, and I wanted to have a little more control over my destiny. And so I started the firm for those were my personal reasons. And then professionally, I noticed that a lot of people get intimidated by the subject of accounting. Just the thought of it gives people the creeps. I know some people get anxiety when they think about accounting. And so to be able to bring some calm, some peace to an industry that is not always presented that way, that was the professional reason. So here I am 20 years later and absolutely loving what I do.
Okay. Tell me a little bit about when someone would need a forensic accountant.
So there are a couple of situations, and one of the things that about forensic accounting is it's such a diverse field that you could go into forensic accounting and specialize in all different types of things. So, for example, of course, when there is a financial crime, you need a forensic accountant. So a financial crime would be something like an employee steals from an employer. An employer would hire a forensic accountant to find out how much did they steal, how did they steal it, and what are some of the things that we can do to make sure that this does not happen again. So that's one example of when you would hire a forensic accountant. And there are lots of other financial crimes, but that's embezzlement is one of the most common ones. Then there are also some cases where I've worked in family law. And so in a family law situation, I have worked on cases where maybe there is a dispute over income. So for instance, if there's a couple, maybe they're an unmarried couple, they have a child or children together. One of the parents is supposed to pay child support to the other parent. The parent who has to pay child support is saying, oh, I'm not making as much money as I used to make, and I need my child support reduced. So a forensic accountant will come in to review the financial records of that person or their business. Typically, it's a small business owner because they have a little bit more flexibility on hiding income. And so a forensic accountant will come in to see if there is a decrease in income and where that decrease came from, and if that person is hiding money or things like that. Same is true in a divorce case, especially when there are self-employed divorced people. So you have parties that are divorcing. One party, maybe they own a business together, or maybe one spouse owns the business, the other spouse works in the business, and the one spouse is saying, oh, the business hasn't been doing good for years. And so as a result, I can't pay you child support, or I can't pay you alimony, or I can't give you a certain share. So a famous movie, many of us have probably seen Waiting to Exhale, right? And remember in the Waiting to Exhale movie, when the couple was breaking up and the husband says, well, the business hasn't been doing well for years. And that's usually an instance where a forensic accountant will be hired.
Speaking of that, wasn't her name Bernadette also?
It was Bernadine, so
Bernadine.
close.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very close, right?
Very close. Very close. Yeah.
Okay.
He called her
yes.
Bernie, so.
And which aspect of forensic accounting do you work in
So
specifically?
those examples were examples those are kind of cases that I work
Okay.
on. So I work and there are lots of other cases, things that I don't necessarily do, but there's lots of fraud out there. And so
Yeah.
forensic accountants actually examine fraud. So it could be fraud in healthcare. It could be fraud in insurance, bankruptcy fraud. There's all types of fraud that you need in a forensic accountant to come in, tax fraud, to look at the numbers to see if what the person is saying is actually true. Like, do the numbers tell the same story that the person is telling? And it's
Okay.
usually a different story.
Okay. So you've been doing this for 20 plus years.
Yes.
And what are the most common types of fraud or things that you see in your line of work, especially as you're working with family and couples? What do you see?
So in families, when it comes to that, it's usually the hiding of the assets. So it is the business isn't doing well, or maybe they try to start siphoning off assets or siphoning off parts of the business just to be able. There's a term called divorce planning, and so sometimes spouses that are planning to, one spouse is planning to divorce the other, especially if that's the breadwinner or the primary earner in the family, planning to divorce the other spouse. Then they start divorce planning, and divorce planning is usually involved them doing something to lower their income or to look less affluent. I'll use that word instead of poverty. So you want to look less affluent when it comes to your finances, so that when you get to that point where you're actually filing for divorce, your financials, the numbers that the judge or the is using is based on those maybe fabricated numbers. So
And how do they do that? What do they do to make themselves look less affluent, as you say? Like what are some of is there commonalities that you can speak about, or common themes that, people will try and do in order to do that?
So usually it's self-employed people, because they have a little bit more control over what they report as income. So when you're a self-employed person and you have a business, you tell the IRS how much you made, how much you spent, and what your profit is. And so sometimes it may look like claiming personal expenses as business expenses. And so essentially, they're filing a fraudulent tax return, because the tax return shows that they have less profit than they really have. So that's a pretty bad case. That's not, and then there are other times where I've seen where they will start maybe bring on a partner, right? And if you bring on a partner, now you have to share your profits with someone else. So if you have a business that used to make a profit of $200,000 a year, and now you have this new partner and you get to split their profit $100,000 each, now you have less income to report, less income to be able to support in, when a judgment is being made about child support and or alimony. There are also ways where some people are just dumb. They just do dumb stuff, right? And so they may assign over some asset to another person, maybe a parent or a best friend. Like, hey, I need to put this in your name for a little while I'm doing this. But I think the thing that most people don't realize is almost everything has a paper trail. And so when you make those transfers, when you make those assignments, when you start moving money around, there's a paper trail for that. And trying to get out of paying child support or trying to get out of paying alimony and then ending up with a tax fraud case is so much worse. Like, paying alimony is not as bad as paying taxes, because the IRS's conviction rate is about 97%. So, that's how they got Al Capone. They couldn't get him on any of the drug charges, but tax fraud, they can get you on tax fraud. And so that's one of the things that people are not thinking about when they're doing this divorce planning is, are you committing fraud? And is this fraud tax fraud? Because if it's tax fraud, the IRS is coming. And the spouse that you're damaging, all they have to do is kind of blow the whistle and say, hey, this person is committing tax fraud, and that's not a good situation. So
you said something very interesting earlier. You said the money tells the story. For people that do this kind of thing, hiding the money and fraud, what do you notice about these people?
It's usually a controlling person, right? So you have a person that's used to being in control, or maybe they control the relationship, or they were the dominant person in the relationship. They're usually accustomed to getting their way. People do what they say. So these kinds of behaviors are usually tied to that person. There are also sometimes, when it comes down to fraudulent behavior, these are people who are kind of wheeler and dealer. Like, they're used to being the life of the party, or being the person who is buying drinks for everybody, and just the person that everyone, quote unquote, loves. And that may or may not be the case. Like, they may not really love them, but it's more so, this is just a person that does stuff to be liked. Yeah, there are lots of stories, and it probably varies from person to person, situation to situation, but it's usually, but people who do stuff like this, unfortunately, they're sloppy. They're sloppy, and they don't have good records in place as is, or they don't have good systems in place as is. So as a result, they do stuff that's just dumb.
And I imagine, I don't know, like, just hearing you talk about it, there's a part of me that gets very sad too, especially when you talk about families and children being involved in child support. So it also sounds like people would go through any lengths not to give anything to children or families, so much so that they don't care about the consequences.
And I think it goes beyond caring about the consequences. I don't think they really realize the consequences, because, quite honestly, if people were aware, there are some people who just really aren't aware that what they're doing is fraud. They probably listened to a buddy of theirs who did the same thing and got away with it. And so they don't really know that it's fraud. And then there are some people probably who don't care. But I would venture to say that over half of the people really don't even know that this is fraud, and this is something that can cost you a lot in the long run. When you think about having to be convicted of tax fraud, that's huge. When you think about the penalties and the potential jail time and things like that. So,
can you run down, based upon your experience, a common list of things that are fraud that people that, in cases that you've worked on that people might not know? Like, can you just, tell us a couple of practices that are maybe fraudulent?
And I think sometimes it's people they think fraud is something really big, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so fraud is when you intentionally misstate something. You intentionally do something to misstate whatever it is that you're trying to say. So fraud on your financial statement fraud could be you are intentionally trying to misstate your income. Example, people who are trying to qualify for houses. So they want to show as much income as possible on their tax returns, because they know that the mortgage company is going to pull tax returns and tax transcripts. And so they may inflate their income to be able to afford this big, pretty house that they want, that they really can't afford. That's fraud. That's mortgage fraud. And that's also tax fraud. Then you have someone on the flip side who's divorce planning and trying to make their income look less than it really is. And so now they're deducting personal expenses as business expenses to lower their taxable income. Again, that's fraud, because you are basically underreporting your income. So those are two things that a lot of people do. Like, people don't even think about, hey, I've had in the beginning, like when I first started my business, before I was really branded as that by the book person, right? People would ask me stuff like, can you make me some pay stubs so that I can qualify for this car loan? And I'm just thinking, like, that's fraud. People don't really, you think it's harmless. You're just getting this, you can really afford it, but you're not claiming all your income on your tax returns or whatever the case may be. But in some place, you're committing fraud because you're telling somebody a lie. And I always, like, I jokingly say, like, people want to be balling when it comes to the banker, but when it comes to the IRS, they want to be broke. And you just can't pick. It's like, if you're going to be balling, if you're going to have all this money, then you got to have money when you go to the bank, and you got to have money when you pay your taxes, when you go to the IRS.
Yeah.
So.
It also makes me wonder, if people are asking you this, that somewhere down the line, someone must have said yes.
Oh, yeah,
before
absolutely.
You said no.
Yeah, there are people. And after I said no, they go to somebody else, and someone else said yes. Years ago, probably about 17 years ago, maybe less, maybe 15 years ago, I prepared a tax return for a young lady that had a business. She brought me, I said, I need to see your bank statements to prove that you have this income, because this was during the housing crisis, right before everything happened with the mortgages, and all of the housing market kind of crumbled. And people were getting mortgages based on bank statements and things like that. So anyway, the person asked me to prepare a tax return. Well, I said, I need bank statements. I need proof that you have this income. So with the bank statements, I was able to verify the income that this person was reporting matched the income that was on the bank statement. And the return I prepared showed, the business had X number of dollars, some expenses, and a good profit, right? And I assumed that the person took this tax return and used it to apply for a mortgage. Well, this same person went to someone else, because they knew that I wouldn't have done it, to amend the tax return so that they could pay less in taxes, because they already got the mortgage, right? And so now they don't need to show all of this income. So they wanted to amend the tax return to show less income. Well, I don't know how they caught this person, but one day I was in my office and an IRS agent showed up, and they were investigating this person for tax fraud. I'm just grateful that I filed the legitimate tax return, and and it was on the news and everything. This person went to prison for mortgage fraud and tax fraud. So it's just not worth it. And a lot of times, like I say, you think that it's harmless, you're not hurting anybody, but it really is. It is a crime. It is fraud. And yeah.
So you've mentioned that. Can you talk a little bit about the consequences of some of your findings, like the consequences or prices people have to pay when you found out that they've been misbehaving with their money, so to speak?
So in some of the family law cases, the consequences is, like, a couple of cases that I worked were cases where one parent was trying to get child support reduced because he's saying, his business was losing money or whatever. And based on the findings, there was no evidence that the business was losing money, so child support remained the same.
Sure.
So the consequence in that case, it wasn't anything legal. I think that if there was cause for maybe some tax fraud there, but I don't think it was pursued.
Okay.
And then I've had other cases where, with divorce cases, same thing, business owners are saying the business is not doing as well as it used to, and they had to sell the business and split the proceeds on that kind of thing. So sometimes it doesn't work out the way that the perpetrator, we'll use that word, intends for it to work out when they're doing these things. And of course, in the cases where there was actually a crime, then there was like jail time or probation involved. So
when you're brought in on a legal case, who is it that normally brings you in to look at these sort of numbers?
usually if the attorney makes the suggestion,
Okay.
and then it's up to the client whether or not they want to engage or not.
Okay. And I imagine, that this, I don't know, how lengthy is it for you to kind of go through and look, how long does it normally take, or how, because you've been doing this for a while. So when you're brought into a court case, what's that process like?
Every case that I've worked had different timelines. Most people don't think to hire a forensic accountant in the beginning. And so I'm usually hired at the last minute. And so it's hurry up and rush, kind of thing. Whereas if the conversation was had in the beginning of the case may have gotten settled sooner. But usually in the last couple of cases that I've worked, they're always tight deadlines. It's like a, kind of hurry up and get this done so that
what type of deadline is it? What are we looking at?
A month.
Wow. To go through how much worth?
Yeah, it depends. Like, thankfully I have a team, so it's not just me kind of combing through the finances, but yeah. So going through sometimes years of documents. Yeah.
When should people bring you on? Ideally, when should people start thinking about hiring a forensic accountant like yourself?
In the beginning. So in a family law case, which is most of what we're dealing with here, in a family law case, when in the beginning of the proceedings, if it feels like the spouse is not going to be cooperative and they're being resistant or they're being evasive when it comes down to numbers, especially when you hear the buzzwords like the business isn't doing as well, or we've been losing money for the last couple of years, and those losses are not, they don't correlate with the lifestyle that you all have lived in the last couple of years. Mm-hmm. Those are times when you might want to hire a forensic accountant. The bad thing is that the person who is being shafted is the person who needs the forensic accountant the most, and they're usually, in many cases, the person who can afford the person the least. And that's what's hard, because if you have, let's say, for instance, if you have a stay-at-home mom and the husband has owned the business, the mom's kind of helped out with the business, but primarily her job has been taking care of the children. Mm-hmm. And now he's saying that the business is not doing well. When they're separated, she may not have enough money to be able to pay for a forensic accountant and an attorney.
Can you give me a ballpark figure of what a forensic accountant would cost in a court case?
It really depends. So for us, we start with a review. Our first level of service is a review, and that's $2,500. Okay. And that's just to kind of review your documents, see if you have what you have, if you have anything. Gives you we can give you a scope of work, like how long is it going to take, how much is it going to cost, those types of things. So just to get started, in most cases, you're going to need about $2,000 to $3,000 just to get started. And then from there, it just depends on what's involved. So things to consider, things that make the case more expensive is when you have someone who's not being cooperative. So they're not being cooperative. So you got to pull teeth to get bank statements, or they send bank statements and then they're missing months. I've seen cases where they totally omit a month, and when we finally get that month, they omit that month because it was an amazing month, and they had like 3 times the income in that particular month. So things like that kind of delay the process, and it makes it sometimes more expensive because it's a lot of back and forth and a lot of requesting of documents and things like that. So
when you have that, how do you get access to that information? Is that something that's court ordered, or is that something that you're simply asking? Like, for example, if I'm the spouse that's, been responsible for the children and I don't have any money, and you have to get the finances from my spouse, so I'm then divorcing, and my spouse doesn't want to offer up their statements, how do you
they
get
have
access
to.
to?
So they
Okay.
have to. So when they don't want to issue the statements,
Yeah.
they're just being difficult and trying to prolong the process.
Sure.
The attorney can subpoena that information
Okay.
from the bank. It just takes longer, and sometimes the statements from the reprints from the bank don't look like the actual statement. So things like check images will be missing from the reprints, and as opposed to the actual statement where the check images were actually included on the statement. So it makes things, it doesn't completely stop it. It just makes things more expensive and more time consuming because subpoenas cost money to subpoena records. And so that's an additional fee that you as a spouse would incur on the legal side. So it's kind of painful to see and to watch sometimes. And as much as I love to help people, it breaks my heart that sometimes they're just not financially able to hire me, and I can't work for free.
Yeah. I also wonder too, is there a part of your job that gets dangerous? Because I imagine if people are going through these lengths to try and hide money that they don't want to pay, they probably get very enraged when you find it and say that they're lying about it. Has there ever been any sort of backlash from that?
Not yet, no. Well, I'm not even gonna say not yet because I don't want to claim it.
Yeah.
But I haven't. But I can see how that would, potentially be an issue.
Yeah.
And those are also things that you take into consideration when you're taking cases.
Okay. How do you do that?
I mean, by asking questions, once you've done it enough, you can kind of see what the warning signs are, if there are things that you should be concerned about from a safety perspective, because it's going to be known that you are the person that's working on the case, because you may even have to testify in court if it goes to court. Absolutely. Or you may have to submit a report or something like that. Absolutely. So it'll be known that you are the person. So it is, I don't know. Thank God I just haven't had any issues as it relates to those things. And maybe I just haven't found anything that was so egregious that.
What are some of the safety concerns that you look for before you take on a case?
So I've never had a case that has made me pause to the point of thinking, I don't know if I want to take this case. So I can't say that I've had that where I said, I don't think so. Honestly, at this stage, and since I've been in business, the things that I'm thinking about are how cooperative will this be? How much teeth pulling will I have to do to get this done? Because those are all things that I factor into the time and the rate of the project. Because if there's a lot of babysitting, if there's a lot of begging, that's time. And that's time that I could be using doing something else. So I always take those kind of things into consideration. So thankfully, I haven't had any issues where I had to be concerned from a safety perspective. But I have had issues that have made me pause as to whether or not I want to deal with the other things that will go along with the case. Yeah.
And what is it that gives you pause? Is it just the teeth pulling, or is there other things that gives you pause?
Usually it's that. or
Okay.
if I feel like there's not full transparency, like there where I feel like maybe people aren't being honest. It could be the spouse that is the injured spouse, we'll call her or him, or it could be the the other person. I don't know, like it's just a sense. I don't know if it's a real science. It's just kind of just the sense that I get. Like, is this going to be a difficult case? Is it going to be worth the money? Is this something that I want to invest a lot of time into? And so I'm just really grateful that I'm in a place in my business where I can say yes and no. Like I can literally say no to a client and it's going to be okay. Like I'm still going to eat shrimp next week. So
Are there things, I don't know, and maybe might be outside of your scope or not, but as you're talking, I'm wondering if you thought to yourself that there are perhaps maybe preventative measures that people can take when they're getting married or when they have children beforehand, so that your job or what you do doesn't become an issue down the line.
yeah, absolutely. So a lot of times people think that prenuptial agreements are things that only rich people need or people who have lots of money.
Mhm.
But prenuptial agreements is a great way to protect yourself from this. And prenups are not always about if we divorce, this is how we'll split. In a prenuptial agreement, you can agree to things like you will go to therapy together, or you will have family meetings, or you will have quarterly meetings to discuss the family finances. You can talk about how you're going to handle rearing your children. All of those kind of things can be put in a prenuptial agreement. Most people don't know that. And so having those kind of conversations up front to talk about how will we handle the finances, how will we handle rearing our children, how will we handle our family, like loaning money to family and things like that. All of those kind of things, those are conversations that you can have up front and put in a prenup so that there's a conversation, there's documentation of that. Then there's also both spouses need to be involved in the finances. I don't understand why in 2021 we still have people who don't know what's going on with the finances. You don't know where the money is coming from. You don't know how much money is being made. All you know is every time you swipe your card, it works. That's just not acceptable. So both spouses need to understand what's going on with the finances, especially if you're filing joint tax returns. That's another piece of the puzzle. So when we talked about people hiding money or committing tax fraud, if you are filing a joint tax return with your spouse and you don't know what's going on that tax return and there's a fraud case, guess what? You are just as liable for fraud as the spouse. And so know what's going on. Don't let somebody else sign. Don't let your spouse sign the tax return for you. You sign it and you look at it and ask questions about it. Pay attention to the bank statements and know like where this money is coming from. People are, and because when it's time to get divorced, then they're saying stuff like, oh, well, he didn't always deposit all of the money into the bank account. He put some of it in the safe in the house. Well, hon, that's fraud. And you are a participant in that fraud, so just be aware of what is going on so that if, God forbid, if you're in this situation where you decide to divorce, you're not blindsided. You know what's going on in the finances. And it's just, I don't know. I don't understand it. Maybe because I'm an A-type personality, but I just don't understand how someone can just be blindly led. Like,
Yeah, I definitely see it a lot in my line of work, when you have people that are in these abusive relationships. And as you said, people that are usually trying to hide the money can be a very controlling type of person, or they want to purport one type of image. So I can definitely see how it can come up and where another person can perhaps be coerced into just kind of going along and not asking questions. But I'm glad that you brought up the point that when you're married, even if you don't know what's going on with the money, if this person is doing something that they shouldn't be, you are just as liable as they are because it's considered communal.
Yeah, especially if you file a joint tax return. Now, if you file a separate tax return, you may have some, leeway. But when you file a joint tax return, if your spouse is doing something that they're not supposed to do, you're just as liable. So it's really important that you know what's going on, that you're asking questions. And I mean, I'm not a therapist, I'm not a counselor, so I can't speak to the techniques and the things that you need to do to be able to do that. Just the fact that it needs to be done. There needs to be conversation about it. Don't get so caught up. A lot of times, like you said, people who are in these abusive type situations, they are so used to being in control, and people get so caught up in being in control and just maybe even being taken care of, that they're not asking questions, because whenever they want something, they get it. When they want to go somewhere, they get to go. They drive the car that they want to drive. They live in the house that they want to live in. Yeah, maybe they have to deal with X, Y, Z, but and it's kind of bad when you don't really know those things, because they can come back to bite you really hard later.
So can you give us an example or some examples of questions that we should be asking or things that we should be looking at aside from tax returns when we want to know what's going on with our spouse's money? Like what should we, like when spouses sit down together to talk about money, perhaps what they should be talking about or what questions they should be asking, or if your spouse is unable to answer certain questions about money, what are those red flags?
So you always want to know sources of income, like where's the income coming from, and so having a good idea of what it is that this person's business does, what their sources of income are, and there should be something in you that has a radar to know where your spouse's ethics stands, right? And so there are some people who kind of push the line when it comes to ethics, and they're the same people who say it's just a little white lie kind of thing. And so knowing those things should at least trigger something in you to wonder if you should question things. I think that in many cases, when hindsight is 2020. Been there, done that. I have the T-shirt as well, right? And so, when we look back at things, we can always say, "Man, I should have asked about these things." The things that kind of make our ears perk up, the things that make us go wonder. Those are usually the things that you should question. I can't give you a list because
Sure.
Yeah, it could be anything, but I think that we know, like the person, hopefully, the person that you're in relationship with, that you're married to, and so there are certain things about them or the way that they do business or the people that they do business with that should cause maybe some pause or maybe cause you to question those things.
When you say ethics too, for the layperson, can you break down what you mean by a person's ethics?
So ethics can be something like, when you're in the grocery store, if the cashier forgets to ring up the pack of gum that you put on the conveyor belt, do you say something, or do you say, "Oh, I got it for free"? That's a level of ethics, right? That's a very low level of ethics. Then you have ethics where you're doing business with somebody and they tell you to look the other way when something is happening. Are you the person who looks the other way, or are you the person that will walk away from the deal? And so that's a higher level of ethics. So we all have a level of ethics. We all have something in us that will, we may not be as ethical. We might not be as honest when it comes. You think, oh, that pack of gum was only 25 cents. It's not a big deal, right? And so some people might think that it's not a big deal. And then
Sure.
there's somebody else who says, oh, no, absolutely not. I'm not going to take, it's not mine. I didn't pay for it. I'm not going to take it. So ethics for everyone, we're all kind of on a different level when it comes to those things. And so when it comes to your significant other, your spouse, you know what their ethical beliefs are and how they respond in certain situations.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. When you're brought in on a case, what percentage of the cases that maybe you're brought into do you feel like the spouse is unethical?
In family law cases, probably all of them.
Wow.
There's a level, because if the person, honestly, let's just think about it. If the person was ethical, they were always above board, they did what was right, they did what was fair, they wouldn't even need a forensic accountant, because they would be willing to just split things in an equitable manner. They would be willing to pay to support their children. They'll be willing to pay to support their former spouse until he or she got on their, and so if they were extremely ethical people, they wouldn't need me.
Mm. Yeah, I imagine that now. That question sounds a little silly, doesn't it? But
No, it's not a silly question, because I've never been asked that question before. And in thinking about it, it's like, wait a minute, if they really had ethics, I wouldn't have that line of business.
you wouldn't have a job.
At least not that part of it, so.
What do you think the most common reason is that people are unethical when it comes to their children and their spouses? Is it pure greed, or do you think it's
I
something
think it's
else?
a lot. It could be a lot of things. I think just people have a selfish nature. There are some people, we all have a selfish nature. It's within us all to preserve ourselves at some level. But when we get to the point where you're the only person that you're thinking about, then I think that's when it kind of takes over. So I think that being selfish, because selfish entails all those other things. If you're selfish, you're usually greedy. If you're selfish, you're usually some other things. I think selfish is the underlying characteristic of someone who doesn't feel like that they should take care of their kids or take care of a former spouse.
Wow.
When you think about when, I don't know the details because I didn't read all the stories on the case, but when you have major, like, millionaires and billionaires who get divorced, there's some back and forth, there's a little, but in the end, it's like she gets her half, he gets his half, and they just kind of go and do their own thing. And those are, I don't know if they're good people, because I don't know why they got divorced or anything like that, but that's an example. I don't know if that's because one attorney wore the other attorney down, but essentially I feel like that's the way it kind of should be. When you really figure out what's equitable, what does this person deserve, and when it comes to your kids, it's like, I don't know. I think that's another show. I think that's another show, Dr. Jones. I don't think we have time for that.
The one thought I had was, you mentioned when you should be brought on in the case, was, when people are kind of hiding things and so forth. But I almost wonder if you should be brought on to a case where people are also threatening that I'm not going to give you a dime, you're never going to see anything from, I almost wonder if it should be brought in, or even a step further, even if you have to go to court at all, if you should be brought in then, or someone like yourself should be brought on then, if we have to take it there.
Yeah, I think that, it's usually when it's just not amicable, where you're not going to be able to work it out. There's always going to be dissension in divorce because somebody is hurt. Maybe somebody doesn't want the divorce, or somebody can't believe that it's kind of gotten to that point, and so
Right.
there's resistance and things like that. But so those things are natural, I guess. But when you get to the point where you're saying things like you just said, then yeah, I would agree that it probably needs to happen at that point. And it's almost like most people know when it's going to be a tough one, but you just don't know who can help you in that situation, And a lot of times with the attorneys, a lot of times the attorneys know, like, hey, you needed a forensic accountant. I've had attorneys call me and say, hey, I got a case that I need you to take a look at to see if this is something that you can do. So a lot of times it comes from the attorney. But again, unfortunately, there are times when the spouse who needs the accountant can't afford it.
Mm.
And that's kind of the unfortunate part.
Okay. Give me 1 second. Okay, so Bernadette, this has been such a helpful interview for me as well as my listeners. I know that, I learned a lot from hearing you. So, it's good to have these conversations about money. It's good to know what links people will go to. And I know that we probably didn't get through all of the things that you've seen in your line of work, but I think you gave us a wealth of information. So if people want to contact you or know more about you, tell us where we can reach you.
Absolutely. So my website is bythebookaccounting.com. And that's by the book, like we follow the rules, BYTHEBOOK accounting, ACCOUNTING.com. And when you go to our website, you can see about the services that we offer. And there are also links to our social media pages on our website.
Okay. And are you only available for hire in Georgia?
No. So that's the good thing about being an accountant, that we can work from state to state and we don't have to be licensed in multiple states. And so, yes, I do. I have clients. I did a family law case in Maryland, and thankfully I didn't have to testify, so I didn't have to jump on a plane. But
Okay.
yeah, so I've worked cases in multiple states as well.
Okay. And so I guess the bottom line is people should be afraid if they hire you, because you're going to find the money, and that money's going to tell a story.
It's going to tell a story. Money always tells a story.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being a guest on the show. I really appreciate all the wisdom and insight that you offered.
Thank you for the invitation.
Okay, so you heard that episode with Bernadette Harris. Love to know what your thoughts are. If you want to shoot me an email, if you want to follow me on social media as well as the podcast and leave a comment there, that's a great way to do it. Also, if you like what you hear on the podcast and it's been very helpful to you, please help out this small podcaster by liking the show, leaving positive feedback on iTunes or whatever podcast player you use. And be sure to share the episode with a friend or a person that you think could benefit from listening to it. As always, thank you so much for spending this time with me. And until next time, you guys take care of yourselves and be well.